Hello, gorgeous soul. Welcome to Calm AF. I am so excited to bring you part 2 of this conversation that I've had with Amanda Gibby Peters. We are talking clutter. We are talking Feng Shui. We are talking living space. We are talking neurodivergent minds and neurodivergent differences on all how they kind of come together with how we deal with our stuff. And if you have enjoyed this conversation from last week and then this conversation, make sure you click the link in the show notes. We are having a kind of part 3 to this conversation, but we're doing it on Zoom. And it's just going to be Amanda and I really diving deeper into why our clutter really matters in all the ways, right? It's not just about having like a clean space. There is so much more to it. And we really want to share with you in a different way, in a Zoom call. So you are invited to be a part of this conversation. It is totally free. All you have to do is click the link in the show notes. You sign up. You will get an email with the Zoom link with all the information. It's happening Thursday, October 26th, which is tomorrow if you're listening to this in real time. And yeah, just make sure you click. And if you can't come live to the conversation, we'll just send you the replay. No big deal. All right. I hope you enjoy part 2 of this conversation about clutter with Amanda Gibby Peters. This is Calm AF, a podcast for humans who are hard on themselves. A podcast for the overthinkers, people pleasers, perfectionists, and overachievers. I'm Kristen Finch, and I'm going to teach you how to quiet that incessant negative chatter in your head. Because you know what a person with a calm mind can do? Anything they want. Grab your coffee, gorgeous soul, because today's the day you get Calm AF. We do have to allow ourselves to evolve and to continuously meet ourselves where we are. Like today, you are your future self and your current self and your past self. So really all you can do is meet yourself where you are as your current self and say, what works for me today? And how can I keep building on this?
Yeah.
Did I go off on a tangent? Did I take it too far away?
No, because actually I think that Feng Shui is exactly that. It's about how do I create a space that gives me, I know this word is on its way out, but the optimal chances for success, and success meaning feeling good, whatever that is for you, right? So how do we do that? But then also collaborating with your home in a way that helps support or hold you accountable. And again, however that looks for you, to who you're becoming. That's what your home is. Like that to me, that's the real missed opportunity. It's not about, can you do this one tip I shared? It's not about, is this hard or easy? Let me tell you, simple is not easy. And there's a scale there, but a lot of these things aren't quote unquote easy for everyone. And there's just, again, because in so many different circumstances and situations, people just have a lot of different things going on at any given moment. So it's about, how can I collaborate with my home and where are there opportunities for improvement, right?
Yes.
To me, sometimes it can be something as simple as replacing that lamp bulb that has been burned out for 3 months. That is a big win. And we could go down that rabbit hole. We won't. But like that alone is a really big win. Getting rid of something that has bothered you since it was given to you is a really big win, because now that voice, that conversation isn't happening every day, drip, 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 right? Like it's removed. So there are things that you can do that help who you are today.
Yes.
And that are certainly going to help create the momentum toward who you are trying to become. But again, those are conversations you have with yourself. If I'm not there, I'm not plotting that out. And so when you're having that moment of discernment, and it is discernment of what is going to fit, that is on you to make sure that, like you said, it feels good, and that it feels good in a way that it works for you.
Yes, it's working with the way you are wired. It is. It's like,
Yes.
who am I right now? What do I know about myself from my past self? How can I apply this so that it can help me move towards who I'm becoming? That is always that's why I said we're our past self, current self, future self. We have to apply all three selves all the time, right? Like, what have I already learned about myself? Who am I right now? And where am I going? And who am I becoming? And then that is where we make decisions from. And I can bring this back to one of the simplest examples I have, kind of one of the big ahas for me in my, journey of becoming who I wanted to become, AKA getting my shit together. And this is my clutter story. You know my clutter story very, very well. I was clearly, I've always been ADHD. And then I was pregnant with Emily, my daughter, who's now 17. And listen, ADHD and pregnancy is a whole thing. And we moved into a new house. We built a house. I was 9 months pregnant with Emily when we moved in. And basically, I was already overwhelmed by everything. And this was kind of before I had learned, I was still learning how to kind of keep up with myself and know how my brain was wired. And so I'm not able to lift heavy boxes. Everyone's coming in with the boxes and where do you want this? Where do you want this? What should we do with this? And so my overwhelmed brain just started telling everyone, just put it in the basement. I'll do it later. Just put it in the basement. I'll do it later. Spoiler alert. If I had known my brain as well as I know it today, no, you won't get to it later. Like, what do you think's going to happen after? First of all, that's never how you've done anything, right? Like, making the pile bigger is not going to be like, now I'll do it. It's going to be like, just pretend that basement doesn't even exist. I'm just going to walk past that door because that place is overwhelming and scary. I don't know where to start. And it's so much. And oh, by the way, now I have a newborn baby. So
Yeah.
clearly that whole, like, I'll get to it later. But eventually, like, that became the whole theme of the house, right? Like, it was just, I don't know what to do this because I'm overwhelmed. And so everything, just put it in that drawer, just put it under the couch, just put it behind this, put it in that closet. And that became the theme. The overwhelm that I was indulging just created more overwhelm.
Yeah.
And eventually I got to the place, again, I had this aha moment that we all get to where, like, that's it, I'm getting my shit together. But this time I was like, hold on, hold your horses. I have several decades of experience now showing me that me trying to take on this giant project, this thing that makes me feel overwhelmed, when I am in this state of, oh, I'm going to do it now, like, this is the time. What always happens is I try it and I get overwhelmed about 7 hours in and I stop. And so now I have an even bigger mess than when I started. And it's going to be like 3 to 6 months before I come back. That is my pattern. Instead of making that a problem, that there is something faulty about me or that I'm bad because I can't get my shit together, let's just see how I can work with this. So here's what I ended up doing. This is what worked for my ADHD brain. Is I started thinking, I was like, all right, in order to not do this whole basement project where I start it and then I quit, I'm going to try and do it differently. And I'm going to try and do it in a way that feels like I am making moves, but it's not going to shut me down. So how can I do this? I've got 2 babies now at this point, and I'm going to find time during my day. I'm going to work with where I am right now currently in this season of my life. 2 babies. I'm working part-time. My husband's kind of gone all the time. So this is my project. He was working and traveling all the time. And so I started thinking about it. Could I plan on an hour every day? No, that's not going to happen. Could I plan on a half hour? And eventually, long story short, I came to the place where it felt like this feels doable and it still feels like I can be consistent-ish with it. 10 minutes. I could go down to the basement for 10 minutes. I'll bring a garbage bag or a box, depending on what part of the basement I'm working on. Is it donation? Is it throwaway? I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to leave. Now, what my brain offered, because of my past with ADHD and trying to do it differently my whole life, is that's going to take forever, right? Like that is going to take too long. You're not going to see any progress. Like you need that quick hit of dopamine of like, oh, look at that finished basement. Like, but that's not how it works. And so I brought it down to this micro level. I'm like, at 10 minutes every day, I'm going to have at least like a 10-minute chunk of time. And if I don't, there are bigger conversations to have. So that's what I did. I started doing it 10 minutes every day. And I let myself let that be enough. Let this just be enough, because this is probably the only way that I'm actually going to get it done. And what happened was, yes, my brain really wanted to. The first few days when I would go down there and I'd be like, going through my stuff and I'm like, oh, that's so great. Look at this. It's happening. Just keep going. Right. And I'd be like, nope, that is not how it's going to happen. I know that your ADHD brain wants it all to happen. That's not what's going to happen. And so that's what I did. And honestly, not only did it not take as long as I thought it was going to, like I thought this was going to take at least 5 years. Because again, my ADHD brain has no concept of that. Like looking at something, I was like, I don't know, 5 years, 1 month, I don't know, like could be anything. But I'm just going to keep showing up consistent-ishly. But I'm relentlessly committed to this, right? To clearing my clutter, because I know how bad it makes me feel. Every time I walk past the basement door, I have this little voice that's like, you don't have your shit together and you never will. And so the story started changing because I was showing up. I could do 10 minutes and I let the little tiny dopamine hits know that there was like a longer project here and letting it take as long as it needed to take, because I was taking where I was currently and working towards the person I was becoming. And so that story started changing. I would walk past the basement door and think, oh no, I'm doing it. Like it's happening. It's in progress. And it took some time for my brain to let that be enough. Not that I had to wait for the finished product to be like, I did it and now I'm awesome and happy, because I knew that was never going to happen. And so this is how I worked with my clutter. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I do have this like finished clean basement. Like it happened. I finished the project. And to me, that was a huge win, because that's not my story in my life, is like finishing things that I start. I always quit things. That was my story. And now I had this idea, this new story in my head, like, wait, maybe that's not true. Maybe I can, as long as I'm working with the way I'm wired. And also knowing I had read all the clutter books. Like, what was that book? You'll probably remember it. It was like Organizing Your House from the Inside Out or something like that.
Was it like Julie Morgenstern or something? I think
maybe. Yeah.
I don't know.
Basically in a nutshell, it was like all of the books that I had read were trying to get me to do it in a very specific way. And I just had to let that go. I just had to say, like, I'm going to take this basic information and try and make it work for me, because this is before that I knew you. And so that is the way I worked through this clutter. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because this is a conversation that you and I have had for so long about the clutter, where, once I learned, I remember sharing with you right away when we first met that, this story of clutter, and you're like, oh, well, here's why that's so important, right? Like, because here is the energy behind clutter. And then we went off into that. But, I think the example is me taking something that I wanted that felt energetically aligned to the person I was becoming, and taking the thing that people were offering me and not using it against myself, but adapting it to fit who I am. And that is what I do with everything now, with, people who talk about any sort of, if someone hands me like a process, like this is the process, I'm like, that's great, thanks. And now let me just like pull it all apart, find the way it's going to work for me, and start doing it in those little baby micro steps.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do with Feng Shui.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, essentially, I
Yep.
try to make it as easy to digest, quick metabolism, so that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of confusion or contemplation involved. But let me say this. I love that process of breaking it down. And yes, you do know when we talked about it, when people go into those spaces, by the way, everyone is overwhelmed. Some people may be able to do the 7 hours. I strongly discourage it. I'm not a big believer in a before and after unless you are really having an almighty wind. But the reason is because it's not just wiring that you're confronting. It is all the different versions of yourself.
Yes.
When we start storing things, it's not only the energy of who we were in that moment, which oftentimes when we're putting things aside, it is, just exhaustion or procrastination or guilt or obligation. I need to hold on to this, or fear. What if I get rid of this? The ambiguity. Well, what if, right? So you have all of that. And then it's like, times however many boxes there are. So there's a mutiny of you that you're processing. So emotionally, most people are exhausted in those big purges, not because they are physically drained, but emotionally there is so much of them to go through. So just as a side note for everyone, this is why I believe in small steps create big change, because they're sustainable. They don't wipe you out. They don't take you out of the game for weeks or months at a time. And you can keep going back. And you're right. I think that we're wired, everyone, because of the visual world that we live in, of believing in the power of a big before and after moment. But most of the clients I work with, and I mean most, not any sort of segment, find it really difficult to go and do a sweeping change like that. There is a snag somewhere. And I think it's understanding the energetics of your things, understanding the power of predecessor chi, which is, the energy of what was there before. And in those boxes, that's you. And never mind the energy of the thing itself, right? So what does that represent? That is a lot for you to have to process in one sitting.
Well, and it brings it right back. This is why you and I, why our work always marries. It's such a happy marriage. Simple Shui and Calm AF. It really is. Because, you also, if you're bringing in the emotions, and that's my, that's my thing, is feeling your feelings, and at what level can you handle, can your nervous system handle the level of feeling that you're at? And what I know for sure, of being someone who has spent, way before I started coaching, I was already rewiring people's brains and making sure I was tending to their nervous systems and their sensory systems, because I've always worked with the neurodivergent population my whole career. You also have to understand, yes, when you are going through your stuff, it's the compilation of everyone you've ever been, all of the emotions that have been embedded and into your items, into these things that have been shoved in boxes for years. And it's like the emotions that come out when you start doing this. You don't think about it like that. You think it's clutter. No. I was like, it's not clutter. It's not just things. It's every story that was embedded into this item that is in this box, and all of the emotions that come to it. So when you start going to try and clear your clutter, and you do it in this big giant sweep, you are definitely going to be triggering your nervous system, your sensory systems, to say, this is too much, this is not safe, we have to shut this down. Because we can only make change to the degree that we are able to handle it from a nervous system and emotional regulation perspective. So we do it in small little bits. If you knew that this wasn't a project of actually taking things out of a box and putting them in a garbage bag, if you knew it was an emotional project that you were taking, would you choose I'm just going to, be horribly sad and overwhelmingly joyful? I'm going to pick that over let's just do a little bit at a time? we're going to pick
Yeah.
a little bit at a time when we're looking at it from that perspective. And so I think this is also why it's remembering that these small baby the tiniest steps that you let yourself, like, how long can I emotionally handle an kind of an influx of emotion? 10 minutes, right? Like, I'm going to go ahead and feel these feelings for 10 minutes. I teach a concept in my program called the feelings room. Like, we go in there, we learn how to sit with them, and then we go out and we are expanding our ability to handle the feeling. And we're, working on being able to stretch that out for longer chunks of time, because then it does become that lifestyle, that sustainable thing that we can do. But at first, and most of the time, you go in and you do it for these little chunks of time so that you can actually feel the feeling, instead of like, let me just do this thing so that I can get rid of this feeling.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's part of the accountability piece of it, especially when you're talking about clutter, is if people, what I see is people hurry to get the job done, right? Give me the gold star.
Yes.
And what happens is there can be future regret, meaning I let go of something that actually I wish I hadn't, right? So that's something that some people have experienced, and they worry about it. And it's like, well, if you do too much too soon, that can happen. But I also think that the accountability piece of this is when you take your time with your feelings, right? You just said, be with your feelings instead of just plowing over them, is then you understand why the accumulation happened. And when you understand why the accumulation happened, there is a good chance that you're not going to be as impulsive in the future. One of the things that I am constantly stressing is be mindful of the things that are coming in your home. Be mindful of that moment. You talk about, that relentlessness that needs to happen at the cash register before you even get to the cash register, right? Like, you really want to know, what do I think this thing is that I'm bringing home? Because a lot of those things that live in closets, that live in boxes, that hang on hangers with tags on them, that sit in the garage, that sit by the front door, are promises that are not fulfilling, right? That they're, I think that I refer to that as counterfeit happiness. We think this thing is going to bring us a very specific happiness, and then it comes in and it becomes an obligation.
Yep.
And so instead of having that chance to do the thing, right, it's like, high promise, low follow through. And we end up with a lot of that, what I'll call quote unquote disappointment in our space. And so you have to take the time to know, okay, what was I feeling when I bought this? Because I do think that sometimes those things come in because we're coping with something, and it's just a way of not acknowledge, right? We fill instead of feel.
Yes.
You have to know the difference. Yeah.
Yes. I can't say it. We fill instead of feel.
Feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That is brilliant. And that is exactly what we do. Because, and this isn't people's, people a lot of times are like, feel bad that they don't understand this. I was like, you most likely were never taught how to feel your feelings.
Also, we're being marketed to. Like, I don't think that people ever acknowledge the amount of money and psychology that goes into manipulating.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you just know that. Don't ever totally take it on yourself.
When people start working with me, they always say, like, how is this not being taught in school? How is this like emotional regulation and sensory regulation and nervous system? How is this not being taught? And I say it should be taught right alongside with learning to read, learning to walk, learning to ride a bike. Like, this should be a very basic skill that we're all learning. But guess what? Like, there's a whole lot of people who don't want us to be emotionally regulated. It's the people who are making money, a whole economy that is hopeful that we will never be emotionally regulated, self-sustaining, calm AF, I call it. Because calm AF doesn't mean you always feel calm. Calm AF is just this knowing that wherever you are safe. Like, this is okay. Like, you can handle it. That is what I mean when I say calm AF. the economy does not want that. Like they do not want people to be able to be
they want you
think
coping
logically in a decision of whether or not to buy this thing, right? Like, oh, but it's going to make you feel so good. Oh, but look at this person driving this car, wearing this, using this handbag. Like, look at how happy and amazing they have their shit together. And you're like, okay, here's my money. Like, if we can learn how to pull it back and say like, okay, if I am emotionally regulated, if my nervous system is regulated, which I know is a whole hot topic right now, then I'm able to access my higher level thinking, my neocortex, which is where I can use my reasoning skills and say like, will this actually make me feel how I think it's going to feel? And you call it counterfeit happiness. I call it fragile happiness. Same, right? Yeah. It's like for a minute, but then it's gone because there's something else. You still don't have your shit together. And now you just have an expensive car.
Well, and also, when it comes to the things in our space, something I talk about is all of those things having voices. And it's really hard if you've ever been in a noisy room to kind of center and sort of think, okay, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? And it's the same thing in our home when we have a lot of other voices in our spaces, it can be hard to make empowered choices. And so, I always joke, like if I have a client who comes to me and she's like, okay, I'm running to, the Container Store, what should I buy? I'm like, pump the brakes. Let's not buy anything. Let's figure out what we're working with first, because I think that there's so much power in the acknowledgement and awareness of what is happening around us first and editing through that before we bring anything new in. And so, if you're reaching to buy something and you're dealing with a lot of things and you're having that overwhelm and then you're like, I don't know where to start. Sometimes it is looking back at, okay, what is the process? And is there an opportunity to change the process? And for me, where I'm coming from is a lot of times this comes through just like, again, a coping mechanism. Like, I'm feeling this way, therefore I'm going to do this to self-soothe. I'm going to do this to balm myself. Yep. And in fact, it's just creating more of the same.
Yeah. And I think, absolutely, I think this is why for me, and I am not the Feng Shui expert, but I do understand energy and I do understand the voices in your head and the stories that you tell yourself. Yeah. For me, this is why, and this often surprises people when I first start working with them. Yes, we're going to work on your feelings and your systems and all of that. But one of the first places I often do take them to is like your clutter. Because, if you are competing with that, it is clutter in a pretty Container Store box is still clutter. Right?
Absolutely.
It's still clutter. It's just in a prettier package. Yes.
If you put the Visa bill in the drawer, does the balance go away? No.
Yes. We're not talking about organizing clutter here. We're like,
please don't
get rid of the clutter. And the reason being is because if we're bringing it back to the story and to the energy of it, it's always talking to you. That the noisy room, whether it's a lot of people or a lot of clutter, it's like you can't hear yourself. You can't hear your own intuition. You can't make decisions for yourself if you are competing with clutter voice. Like I always say, I'm like, clutter's a mean girl. She is not nice. She is telling you that you suck. She is telling you that you can't get your shit together. She is telling you, and even if you aren't noticing it, like even if you aren't noticing it because it's hidden or it's in a pretty box now, it's still there. And if you want, and I don't know if you talk, I'm sure you do. I shouldn't say I don't know, but if you're trying to feng shui your house and you're like, oh, let me get some cinnamon and my broom for the front door. And that's not a good example. The broom is an easy place to start. But if I'm trying to make the crystal grid for my house because I'm missing a gua, and your house is full of clutter, right? You're like, well, that's great. But here is, let's talk about the hum in the house. Like there's this little chatter that's going on underneath. And that is a really simple place to start, even though it might feel like the place that's overwhelming.
Yeah. And let me just say this, because I know some people, when we start talking about clutter, and noise and voices, people jump quickly to, oh, so feng shui is minimalism. It is not.
No.
I am very much a maximalist.
Yes.
Happy maximalist here. So
Yes.
it really is just about being mindful of what you keep company with. And yeah, I do think that that's another thing that sometimes, again, this is the co-opting that I was talking about earlier, is that sometimes people are like, okay, I'm going to do the feng shui thing without acknowledging what's actually happening immediately around me. And I always liken that to, you buy fresh flowers, put them in a vase, fresh flowers start to wilt. You don't pull out the fresh flowers and just put another bunch in. You dump out the water, you clean the vase, you prepare the space for success. And so it's the same thing in our spaces. If you're going to be working with some of these, what I will refer to as practical magic tips, you want to make sure that your space is also working in sort of some congruency with it. And again, little things that help make those improvements. But yeah, it's just that you can't box things away and you can't ignore certain things and hope that this one thing is going to be enough. It's an orchestration. And that's why the small matters, like the small steps can get you places so much more quickly than these sort of grand efforts.
Yes. And I think, again, back to the whole beginning of the conversation, it's knowing and accepting the way your brain is wired, to take it to the level that is going to work for you in that long-term way. Like it is probably, I think, again, yes, especially for ADHD, right? Especially for ADHD, you're going to have to take a look at that and say, here's how my ADHD shows up. So how am I going to adapt this so that it works with my ADHD? Not trying to change, like cure myself of ADHD and that through, following all of these steps. Like this is just your brain. It's so beautiful and it's so amazing and it's not wrong. This is how it is. It's this way for a reason, right? We need the people who don't have ADHD, but we also really need the people who do. I say the same thing about any of the neurodivergent community, whether it's autism, ADHD, whatever that looks like it's perfect. Your brain is perfect. This is how you are supposed to be wired. Stop trying to use it against yourself. Stop trying to fit people's prescriptions or people even options, right? Like you are not prescriptive when you're giving suggestions, but you are like, here's a bunch of things. And people are like, oh my God, I have to do all of them. Like, please understand your beautiful, amazing, perfectly formed, perfectly wired brain and take those things and adapt them to meet you where you are in the way that's going to create what you want.
Yes, it's about making your homework for you. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, one of my favorite teachers used to always say, run the wisdom through your own filter.
Yes.
Run the wisdom through your own filter. So take those suggestions, figure out what works, what feels like it's meeting you where you're at. And like you said, your beautiful brain will know what's right for you. That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
That's it. That's
no
finally.
Gold stars, no A pluses, no finish line.
So sorry.
It is a practice.
You're just giving yourself gold stars for your baby steps. How about that? Right? Like giving every 10
those
minutes.
I'll hand out all day. Yes.
Yes. If you go down to your basement and clear your clutter for 10 minutes, you get a gold star every single day. How great is that?
Yes, I love that. We need charts. We need those little charts just so we can celebrate all the little wins. The little wins are the ones that excite me. The little tiny improvements are the ones, those stories are the ones that I live for because, again, having done this as long as I have, those are the ones that always seem to lead to the really cool stories that people are like, well, wait, how do I get that?
Absolutely.
And I'm like, if I tell you, you're not going to believe me.
I know. And you and I, again, that's based back to like, we've been doing this long enough to know, like, it really is the small wins. It really is. And you don't want to believe it because you want just that after picture. And it's like, that after picture is false. It's just false. I know you have talked about a long time ago when you first were like, when it was like blogs, when everyone has just had blogs before Instagram and everything, where you would like see behind what was actually happening not in the beautifully curated picture.
Yes,
like that's
yes.
bullshit. What you see online is oftentimes just a very small snippet. Like people with that after picture, it's either not real or they used the small steps to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, you really do have to make whatever you're taking in, and that's for anything, right? Like this doesn't have to be feng shui. It is all of these energetic conversations that we are now privy to, that are now, in the water, all of it. It's like there's an overwhelm that comes from wanting to get whatever that interest is just right. And for me, it's like, let's let go of the fear base. There's plenty of that in the world. We don't need to have that in the stuff that we're doing out of curiosity and out of fun and out of sincere intention for improvement. We just don't need the fear involved. So really making those things work in an almost effortless way for you, meaning not overthink it. Like it may require effort, but you don't also have to overthink it.
Yes. And that's where I come in.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Kristen, this is I love this. Okay, well, I love this conversation. Thank you for having me in your space. Thank you for coming into my space.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that everyone who listens is taking something away from this, because I do, at the end of the day, I want people to just let their shoulders relax.
Yes.
Breathe a little bit more deeply, be a hell of a lot more gentle with themselves. We're all in this together.
We are. We have to lighten up. Like this life is hard. There's so much that's hard. We have to lighten up and just let ourselves, like you said, take a deep breath. My favorite line is like, it's only life after all. Those Indigo girls, they're so brilliant, right? Like lighten up, right? None of it's an emergency. Let's just go with, if something feels like an emergency, just back up, take a deep breath and say like, is it actually an emergency? I always tell my clients, if it is, call 911. If it's not, we can bring it down a few notches.
So true. So true. Okay. Well, thank you so much again for just indulging me with this conversation. And, certainly for the people who've asked questions, I know that they're going to soak you up. And in the show notes, I'm going to share where you can find Kristen. I'm going to definitely recommend her brilliant hubby's book, Dave's book. I love that. I just think it's a great book in general, but certainly for anyone in the neurodivergent community, a fantastic read. And then I'm going to also share a podcast, our previous podcast link, so people can go back and listen to the 2020 version of AGP and Finch.
Yes. Back. Oh gosh, those were the days. We had no idea what was coming.
I had no idea. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love you.
And I love you.
We'll do this again.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Thanks for listening. And before you go, one more thing. So as you know, I am slightly obsessed with helping as many humans tap into their calm AFness as possible. So if this podcast has helped you, would you please leave a review, make sure you're subscribed, and share it with your friends. Also, make sure you head on over to kristenfinch.com to see how you can work with me. You can sign up for my emails and get any other goodies I have available. Until next week, I love you so much. I am so grateful that you're here. I'll see you next time.